Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today, we are going to continue our study of the book of Ezra. We are going to do chapter 2 today. In chapter 1, we read about how King Cyrus was aroused by the Spirit of God to fulfill the prophecy made by Jeremiah, that after 70 years, the Jewish people were going to return to their land and rebuild the temple. And of note, I pointed out in the last podcast several times where there were various parallels and also various significant differences between this return to the land of Israel and Exodus, so to speak, from Persia/Babylon, and the Exodus in Egypt, which when the Jewish people left Egypt on their way to the land of Israel the first time around, back in the book of Exodus. I'm going to point out again in this chapter similar things, some things that are obviously different and some things that are clearly meant to remind us of the previous Exodus. In chapter 2, it's very long and not very exciting, similar to what we find, for example, in the book of Numbers and in other places throughout the 5 books of Moses, throughout the Chumash, where it enumerates families, names of families, and numbers of people, and so on. We're going to have to plow our way through that this time. I apologize if it doesn't seem that exciting. But the general overall effect of comparing the people returning from the Exodus in Persia to Jerusalem and comparing that to the Exodus from Egypt, I think the overall effect is what's important here. So ve'ela b'nei ha-medina, and these are the people of the Medina, the people of the province, ha'olim, who are going up from mishavi hagola. And I'm going to read, what does it mean, the people of the province? If you remember in the last chapter, Cyrus said, the people that are allowed to go back to Jerusalem are those that are people from Judea, can go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. So those people of the province, and I'm learning this like Rashi, referred to the Jewish people who originally come from the lands of Judea, even though they've been living in Persia now / Babylon for several, probably about 3 or maybe 4 generations, but they are still considered the Bnei HaMedina, and we'll see soon why they're still considered people of Judea, even though they've already been living several generations in exile. Mishavi HaGola, the people that are coming from the captives of the exile, Asher Hegla Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel, which the Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, exiled them to Babylon. Vayashuvu LiYerushalayim. These are the ones, I'm going to list them, the ones that are now have returned to Jerusalem, v'Yehuda, and to Yehuda, ish li'iro, each person to his city. One of the glaring points here from this verse is the people are called the people of the Medina. Medina reminds us one of a sovereign state of sorts, an actual political entity of some sort is a Medina. So while Cyrus delivered his decree, he emphasized going back to rebuild the temple. He didn't emphasize resettle the land, and clearly he knew that if they were going back to the temple, they were going to be resettling the land. But his emphasis was on rebuilding the temple of God. His point probably most likely was because he wanted to gain favor in the eyes of God. He was always out to make sure he was good in all the eyes of all the various gods around, and this was the Elohei HaShomayim, the God of the heavens, so must be the most powerful one of them. So he wanted to make sure that his temple would be built, so Cyrus should be able to be even more powerful because now he's got his favor with God himself, or God of heaven, according to Cyrus. The people were thinking of themselves more as the Bnei HaMedina. They wanted to go Vayeshuvu Yerushalayim ish li'iro, each person to their cities. They weren't thinking about, the temple was on their minds as well, but they were primarily thinking about becoming Judeans again and reestablishing their independence. At least the people were. The leadership will get a little bit better idea as we go through this. Asher ba'u im Zerubbabel, and the people came with their leaders. And who were their leaders? Zerubbabel, as we know from, we've already studied this in Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Zerubbabel was the political leader of the returnees. He became the governor, or the pachat, as we learned in previous podcasts. He was a descendant, either a son or a grandson, most likely a grandson of Yehoiachin, the king who had been exiled from Judah. So he was in direct line to be the king, but he wasn't coming back as a king. He was coming back as a governor, and he was the leader. And we learned that he was the only person who was actually, a prophet actually said about him that he was or at least had the potential to be the Mashiach, the Messiah. Unfortunately, that didn't work out that way. Who else were the leadership? The leadership also included other people by the names of Yeshua. Yeshua is most likely Yehoshua ben Yehutzadak. He is the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, who came up. We mentioned him several times. Nehemiah, who we also know, we're going to learn the book of Nehemiah after we complete the book of Ezra, another important leader. And some other leaders who are maybe a little bit less famous, but also important: Siraya, Re'elaya, and Mordechai. Mordechai, of course, makes us think immediately of the famous Mordechai from the book of Esther, the leader of the Jews of Persia in that time. Was this the same Mordechai that also returned with Ezra to Israel? The Chazal, the tradition is that it was the same Mordechai. There are many problems with that tradition because the chronology doesn't quite work out. If one looks at Ahasuerus, his reign was several years, probably somewhere around 2 generations after the Jews had already returned and built the second Beit HaMikdash. But the center of Judaism still remained in Shushan in Persia because most of the Jews did not actually return. So Mordechai's life would have been much farther down the road after Zerubbabel returned with the returnees to Jerusalem. However, tradition has it that this is the same Mordechai, and you can decide which way you want to go. Bilshan, another person named Bilshan, Mispar, Bigevai, Rechum, Ba'ana. These are all names of people. Mispar, Anshe, Am Yisrael. These words, Mispar, these are the numbers of the people of the nation. So the people came with these leaders, as we mentioned, and now we're about to count out the people of Israel that came along. Now, there's going to be a lot of verses here. I'm going to translate them. I apologize if it's not super exciting. There might be a few comments we'll make here and there, but it's going to list a whole bunch of families and the numbers. Bnei Parosh, the people of the family of Parosh, Alpayim Mea Shivim Ushnayim, 2,172. Bnei Shefatia, the Shefatia family, Shlosh Meot Shivim Ushnayim, 372. Bnei Orach, the Orach family, Sheva Meot Chamishim V'Shivim, 775. Bnei Pachat Moav, the people of the family Pachat Moav, which literally means the governors of Moab. Livnei Yeshua, there were several branches of this family. One was Yeshua, the other was Yoav. But between those two families, Alpayim Shmona Meot Ushnei Masar, you have 2,812. Bnei Elam, the Elam family, Elef Masayim Chamishim V'Yarba, that's 1,254. Bnei Zatu Tisha Meot V'Yarboim V'Chamisha, the sons of the Zatu family, 945. Bnei Zakoi Shva Meot V'Shishim, the Zakoi family, 760. Bnei Vani, the Vani family, Sheish Meot Arboim Ushnayim, 642. Bnei Beivoi, the Beivoi family, Sheish Meot Esrim Ushlosha, that's 623. Bnei Azgod, Elef Masayim Esrim Ushnayim, 1,222. Bnei Adonikom, Sheish Meot Shishim V'Shisha, 666. Bnei Vigvoi, the Vigvoi family, Alpayim Chamishim V'Shisha, that's 2,056. Bnei Odin, the Odin family, Arba Meot Chamishim V'Yarba, 454. Bnei Oter, the Yechizkiah, the sons of Oter, and the Oter family, one of their forefathers' name was Yechizkiah. Tishimushmona 98. V'nei Veitzoi, the Veitzoi family, 323. V'nei Yorah, the Yorah family, Meo Shnei Masar, 112. V'nei Choshum, the Choshum family, 223, that's 223. V'nei Gibor, Tishimachamisha, the Gibor family, 95. V'nei Veislachem, the people from the place called Bethlehem, Beit Lachem, Mea Esrim Ushlosha, that's 123. We note that in some cases, these are names of places, and in some cases, these are names of families. Anshe Nitofa, this is another place name. The people that came from the town of Nitofa, Chamishim Mishisha, is 56. I would like to point out, this is important, that these people have been living outside of the land of Israel for several generations, but they still maintained where they came from. It reminds me to some degree of how nowadays in America, some communities still call themselves by the names of the towns in Europe where they came from. Over time, though, that's kind of starts to melt away, and we begin to take on the place names of where we live. However, in the Persian exile, these families still maintained their attachment to the town in Judea, in Israel, where they came from. So the people of Netofa, we just said 56, Anshe Anatot, the people from Anatot, that's famous, that is the town where the prophet Jeremiah was from. Mea Esrim Ushmona, 128 people. B'nei Azmovet, people from this place called Azmovet, Arboim Ushnaim, is 42. B'nei Kiryat Orim, which is probably the same place as what we call nowadays and find in other places in Tanakh, Kiryat Yearim. Kefira uve'erot, and there are also places that were nearby called Kefira and Be'erot, Shavamiot, Arboim Ushlosha, 743. B'nei HaRamah, the people from Ramah, another place, Vigava, and another place nearby called Gava, Sheish Miot Esrim Echad, 621, Anshe Mechmos Mea, Esrim Ushnaim is 122, Anshe Veit El, V'ha'oi, these are famous cities, they show up in the early prophets many times, Beit El and Oi. What time? It's 223. B'nei Nevo, the people from Nevo, 52. B'nei Magbish, 156. From Magbish, 156. B'nei Elam, Acher, the people from the other city called Elam, because we mentioned before one city called Elam, there was another city called the other Elam. Elef Masayim 54. You have 1,254. B'nei Chorim, 320. B'nei Lod, the town called Lod, which is famous nowadays. The city of Lod is where Israel's international airport, Ben Gurion, is located. Chadid ve'Ono, other two towns that are known, Chadid and Ono, which is a modern day, there's a town called Ono again, 725. B'nei Recho, the people from the town of Jericho, which is a famous town as well, 345. B'nei Sina'ah, people from the place called Sina'ah, 3,630. Now, those were the non-priests, but then we're going to list the priests, HaKohanim, of the Kohanim, who were particularly careful in maintaining their lineage and family connections. B'nei Yedaya, the people that were descendants of the priest called Yedaya, Leveit Yoshua, those that were in the family, a branch of the Yedaya family known as the branch of Yeshua, Yeshua being most likely Yehoshua ben Yehotzadak, the one who was the Kohen Gadol. So this is the first family mentioned, and of course a very prominent family. Tisha Me'ot Shevim Ushlosha, there's 973 Kohanim from that family that returned. B'nei Imer, Elef Chamishim Ushnaim, another family of priests, 1,052. B'nei Pashhur, those that were the sons of Pashhur, Elef Masayim Arbim B'Shiva, 1,247. B'nei Chorim, Elef B'Shiva Asar, 1,017. And then there were Haleviim, the Levites, B'nei Yeshua, those that were sons of Yeshua, most likely a different person with the same name, Vikadmiel, and another one named Kadmiel, Livnei Hodavia, those that were, Hodavia, those that were of the branch of that family that descended from someone named Hodavia, Shivim Yarbah 74, Hamishorim, of those that were the singers of the Levites. We know that one of the jobs of the Levites was to sing in the temple, to sing and to play music. B'nei Asaf, those that were descendants of Asaf. We know Asaf. We have many psalms which are written by, sung for the children of Asaph are sung by them. The descendants of Korach, of biblical fame, or biblical not such good fame, but Bnei Asaph, who was known for better reasons, 128. Bnei Hashoarim, the other job that the Levites had was to be the guardians of the gates, to open and close and lock and so on the gates, which was quite an honor. Bnei Shalom, those that came from the families of Shalom, Bnei Oter, the families of Oter, Bnei Talmon, Bnei Akov, Bnei Chatita, Bnei Shovoi. These are other names of families, but altogether they added up to 139 people. And then there was others that had the job of supplying the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, with wood and water and so on. And these were descendants of the Netinim, or the Givonim, from early biblical days, that they had tricked. They had posed as, and they ended up becoming Gerim. They ended up becoming converts to the Jewish people, and they were given this job. So the Netinim, Bnei Tzicha, Bnei Chasufa, Bnei Tabaos, they were of those three families. Other families, Bnei Keros, Bnei Si'aha, Bnei Fadon, Bnei Levanah, Bnei Chagavah, Bnei Akub, Bnei Chagov, Bnei Shalmai, Bnei Chanan, Bnei Gidel, Bnei Gachar, Bnei Ro'aya. Sorry, there's a lot of names. Bnei Ritzin, Bnei Nikoda, Bnei Gazam, Bnei Uzah, Bnei Faseach, Bnei Vesoy, Bnei Asna, Bnei Merunim, Bnei Nefusim, Bnei Vakbuk, Bnei Chakufa, Bnei Charchor, Bnei Vatzlut, Bnei Mechida, Bnei Chasha, Bnei Varkos, Bnei Sisra, Bnei Tomach, Bnei Netziach, Bnei Chatifa. All of these were names of families of Netinim that also returned with Zerubbabel and the other leaders that we mentioned. Another group of Nesinim were the Bnei Avdei Shlomo. We're up to verse 55, the children of the servants of Solomon, of King Solomon. And their names were as follows: Bnei Sotai, Bnei Hasoferes, Bnei Firudah, Bnei Yalo, Bnei Darkon, Bnei Gidel, Bnei Shefatya, Bnei Chatil, Bnei Pocheres, Hatzevoyim, Bnei Ami. Kol HaNesinim, all of these Nesinim, all of these servants of the Beit HaMikdash, of Bnei Avdei Shlomo, and the descendants of the servants of Shlomo added up to the following: Shlosh Meot Tishimushnayim. There were so many families, you'd expect it to be a larger number, but the actual number of all of the above is 392. The Elah Ha'olim Tel Melach, and the following are the people that came from a place called Tel Melach, which means the mound of salt, literally, which must have been a place where there were mounds of salt. Maybe it's referring to the area near where we know Sodom is today, near the salt, the Yam HaMelach, the Dead Sea. Maybe not. Maybe it's some other place. Tel Charsha, the plowed mound, must have been a mound upon which they had crops or something. Keruv Adon Imer. They came from these places, but lo yachlu, but they were not able lahagid beit avotam mizaram im Yisraelheim. But they could not demonstrate with proof that they actually descended from the people of Judea. Now, why is this important? We're going to get back to this as we go through Ezra, but it was very important to the people to maintain their lineage and maintain where they came from. We're going to have a discussion at some point why this is important, and while we read Ezra, while we read Nehemiah, is this something that the people themselves were being so careful with? Is this something that God wanted them to be careful with? But these were people that were part of the Jewish people, but they just did not know exactly where they came from. But they joined the party. They also came back and returned with the rest of the Jewish people. Bnei Deloya, Bnei Tovia, Bnei Nekoda. These included these families, Sheish Meot Chamishim U'Shnayim, which totaled 652 people. Uvnei HaKohanim, and from the people that descended from the Kohanim, Bnei Chavaya, Bnei HaKotz, Bnei Barzilai, Asher Lokach Mibnos Barzilai HaGiladi Isha, Vayikorei Al Shemam. These were called the descendants of Barzilai because their ancestors had married a descendant, had married the daughter of Barzilai HaGiladi, and his name was Barzilai, and therefore this family was called the descendants of Barzilai. Ele Bikshu Kisavam. These people, they were looking for some kind of documentation, Hamit Yachsim, that would prove their actual yichus, meaning their lineage, their genealogy, so to speak. Velonim so, but they could not find the documentation. They could not find in the Persian archives their birth certificates and marriage certificates and so on. And there, even though they claimed to be of priestly lineage, Vayigo'alu min ha'kehuna, they were therefore rejected from being considered legitimate Kohen and legitimate priests. Vayomer hatir shosa lahem, and then hatir shosa said to them, the tradition has the hatir shosa identified as Nehemiah, as the same person as Nehemiah. He said, therefore, asher lo yochlu mikodesh hakodashim, that they cannot eat from the holy kodesh hakodashim, from the karbanot, from the portions that were designated for a kohen specifically, ad amod kohen leurim v'tumim, until a high priest will be appointed with the urim v'tumim. The urim v'tumim was, as we know, located within the choshen, the breastplate that the high priest wore. And at least in the times of the first temple, the first Beit HaMikdash, one could ask the Urim V'Tumim questions, and the choshen, the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, would answer those questions through the Spirit of God Himself. Now, when that were to happen, Nehemiah says that we will then be able to ask, are these Kohanim, are these priests for real? Is their lineage correct or not? Kol HaKohol Ki Echad, the entire congregation all together added up to Arbaribo Alpayim Shlosh Miot V'Shishim, 42,360. This is the entire population that came. Now remember, the entire population that left Egypt and entered the land was 600,000. So here we went through this entire listing, and note that number one, the only tribes that are represented here are Judah and Benjamin and the priests and the Levites. That's it. All the other tribes are unfortunately gone. Then, and that's it. We also had Milvad, this is besides Avdehem, their servants, Viam Hosehem, and their female servants, Elah, these were, in other words, these were besides them, and which were a total of Shivat Alafim Shloshmiot Shloshim Shiva, which is 7,337 of the servants that came along. Vilahem, and among them, Mishorerim Mishorerot Umasayim. There were also 200 singers, male and female singers, that also came and sang and entertained and rejoiced and helped the people rejoice on their return to the land of Judah. Susehem, they came with a lot of horses as well. Shva Meot Shloshim Mishisha, 736. Pirdehem, mules, Masayim Arbim Chamisha, 245. Gmalihem, camels, Arba Meot Shloshim Chamisha, 435. Chamorim, however, donkeys were much, much more. Sheshet Alafim Shva Meot V'Yasrim, they had 6,720. Many more donkeys than the other beasts of burden. Umeirashei ha'avot, and from the heads of the families, bivo'am lebeis Adonai asher b'Yerushalayim, when they came to the place, the location of the house of God, the temple, which was in Jerusalem, hisnadvu lebeitu Elohim, they promised and they donated to the house of God, lahamidoah mechono, those things that were necessary to reestablish and rebuild the house of God upon its foundation. So apparently the ruins from the Babylonian destruction were still there, and the foundation of the Beit HaMikdash was still present, and they used the old foundation in order to build the new building on top of it. It's going to happen soon, but when they arrived, this is the first thing they did, was they made that promise and donated some of their wealth in order to make sure this would happen. Verse 69, Kichocham nasnu lotzar melocha, according to their means. Some were more wealthy, some had more means, some had less wealth, some had less means. But according to their means, they gave to the treasury, which was set aside to be in charge of financing the work. Zahav, they gave it gold. Dar kimonim, That's the Persian coin. That's gold drachmas. Sheish ribaos ve'elef. That's 60,000. I'm sorry, 6,000. 100 or v'chesef monim, and silver moned, which is another coin, chameshes alafim, 5,000, v'kosnos kohanimea, and they gave robes, very valuable robes for the priests to wear. They donated 100 of them. So now vayeshvu hakohanim v'halavim min ha'am, the priests and the Levites and some of the nation settled down there. Presumably they settled down, we'll see where in a second, v'hamishorim, and some of the singers, v'hashoarim, and the ones that were in charge of the gates, v'hanesinim, and the netinim. Those were the servants of the Beit HaMikdash, b'arehem. They settled down in their cities, v'chol Yisrael b'arehem, and the entire people of Israel, meaning all of those that returned, settled in their cities. Interestingly enough, they went to their cities to settle down. They left Jerusalem long before the temple was built. So again, what I emphasized in the beginning of this podcast, they focused more on resettling the towns where they came from than they focused on the rebuilding of the temple. But they did focus on building the temple too, as we see the donations, and the treasury was set up, and the money was donated, and hopefully soon that work is going to begin. We're going to see very soon the beginning of the building of the Beit HaMikdash, which is going to start in chapter 3. Looking forward to studying chapter 3 together, and of course the entire book of Ezra.